Hello everyone, Evan here, and today I'm drawing some King Arthur fan art, which you're probably wondering what prompted that. As it turns out, I got more into King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table this week than I ever thought I would. I ended up watching, believe it or not, I think 6 different movies this week about King Arthur, and I actually am in the middle right now, maybe 5.5 we'll say, because I'm in the middle right now of watching King Arthur, the 2004 version, on HBO, which I had seen before, but as I'm watching it now, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I didn't remember any of this. So anyway, yeah, tonight on this live stream, I want to talk a bit about the best adaptations, the best film versions of the King Arthur legend that Hollywood has been able to offer in the preceding almost 50, 60, 70 plus years. And if you can't tell, maybe you don't know, but this is a shot that I'm drawing now. This is from the 1981 movie Excalibur, the John Boorman film, which, you might be asking, if that's the one I'm drawing, is that like an early contender for Best the Best? And I guess I got to be honest. The answer is yes. I really, really loved this movie Excalibur. I had never seen it before, but I was missing out. And if you haven't seen it before, you are missing out. You got to check out this movie, Excalibur, 1981. But it's not the only good version of the King Arthur legend that's ever been put to film. And it's not even the one that got me super into it. Honestly, the one that got me super into King Arthur was, if you've ever seen the musical Camelot, I think that is also a contender for Best the Best. Not to just give away the conclusion for Best the Best so early in the stream, but I really think it's up there between those two. Excalibur, 1981, John Boorman directing, Nigel Terry as King Arthur. This is his version here. And also Camelot, the 60s version, the musical, the stage play that got turned into a movie, starring Richard Harris, the Irish King Arthur, we might say, and Vanessa Redgrave as Guinevere, and Franco Nero as Lancelot. So that one, I saw Camelot for the first time. I got like a copy on Vudu, the streaming movie locker service, and I got it and I watched it pretty soon after I bought it, and I was just blown away. Like, I had heard some of the music before, and if you didn't know, like, the music in Camelot is by Lerner and Lowe. I forget who does lyrics and who does music, but they're also pretty famous for My Fair Lady, Gigi, and paint my wagon, go paint your wagon, and then some others. But I was actually disappointed after I watched Camelot that there wasn't more from these guys. Like, they had a couple musicals, but I honestly wish there had been more, because Camelot, even at 3 hours long, left me wanting more. And I go back, I watched it for the first time a year ago. I've probably gone back and watched it like 5 times since then. So it has some real replay value for me. And I think that has a lot to do with why I love it. The other big thing there that both Camelot does well in terms of the legend of King Arthur, and another movie does well, I would say, is First Knight from the 90s, starring Sean Connery and Richard Gere as King Arthur and Lancelot. Both those films, Camelot and First Knight, I think do a good job of humanizing the terrible love triangle that's at play in this legend. Like, if you even if you only know a little bit about King Arthur, you probably know that a lot of the dramatic heft of the story, or a huge part of the story, is that Arthur's wife Guinevere cheats on him with, depending on who you ask, her true love, maybe, depending on the adaptation too, of Lancelot. And both First Knight and Camelot, like I said, do a good job, I think, of conveying, what everyone's feeling when they're going through this, and why they would do this, and, why Lancelot acts the way he does, and why Guinevere acts the way she does. And you can contrast that with, I'll say, King Arthur, the 2004 version, which I'm in the middle of rewatching now. In that one, Lancelot, it's really just more caricatures of the characters. It really deviates far from, if you're a fan of, I guess, the canonical myth. I don't know, because I don't know what you would even say is the original version of King Arthur. It's been like a tale told, like, these characters for hundreds of years at this point. But even that being said, not knowing what the canonical version is, it's kind of strange the versions at play in King Arthur, because there, like, Lancelot's he's just Lothario. He's just a straight up horn dog. He's constantly saying, like, his first line of dialogue in King Arthur is like saying that he is the father of the other knight's kids, and he's going to spend a lot of, when one of the knights, it's like Galahad or Tristan or one of them says, I'm going to go get married to a beautiful young lady, and Lancelot's like, well, if she's beautiful, I'm going to come over and hang out there a lot and sleep with your wife. And so it's honestly not the best version of Lancelot. And it's really, since I saw that one so early, I saw it when it came out, like 2004, and I forgot everything about it in the last 16 years. But since I saw it so early, and like my understanding of the King Arthur stories or legends, I was just, it didn't really draw me in. It wasn't like, it didn't make me want to seek out more versions of the story. And even though, like, as a kid, of course, I've seen the young, the kid versions of, like, say, Disney's animated The Sword in the Stone, or all the variations of Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in Kid Arthur's Court. Because, there's the film version of that, which I've never seen. But then there's also the Disney kid version, A Kid in King Arthur's Court. And there's also another Disney version from the 70s that I watched. I lied. I didn't watch 6 King Arthur movies this week because I started this one. It's called Unidentified Flying Oddball, UFO. And it's a 70s Disney movie that's like a redo of a Yankee in King Arthur's Court. But it's just so, it's like, it's not great. But it's also, speaking of not great, another version that I started and I had to finish because there was enough interesting things going on in it, was this is very loosely connected to King Arthur because it has a king, but he's just called the king. I don't know if they say he's King Arthur, but it's about one of the Knights of the Round Table, Sir Gawain, who maybe you've heard of the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and they made a movie out of that in the 80s. What was it called? Sword of the Valiant. And it's not great. In fact, it's bad. But I had to finish it because it's got Sean Connery just chewing up the scenery, acting like he's basically Tom Bombadil. The Green Knight is essentially like the Lord of the Rings character, Tom Bombadil. He's just like this sort of expression of nature and jovialness, and nothing can stop him. But the Green Knight's got a bit more of not quite a bloodlust, but like, if he's going to kill you, if he's got to kill you, he will. And I don't know if Tom Bombadil does that so much. But Sword of the Valiant, even if you liked it, even if, like, as a kid, maybe you had the VHS or something, or you grew up, it's a British movie, like British. So I don't know if it was even, like, technically even has any Hollywood production. Actually, I think it's produced by Menahem and Globum? But those guys who did, I want to say, the Cannon Group, and they made a documentary about them on Netflix and like all the cheesy movies they made. But even if you liked the Sword of the Valiant, you could not like the soundtrack. Like, the score for Sword of the Valiant is like this horrendous synthesized score. It's painful. It's painful on the ears, and it's like this theme that gets repeated every 5 minutes in the film. Thankfully, it's fairly short as a film, but that synthesizer score kills any hype that movie might have had. And, it was just, a lot of the King Arthur films, as you watch them today, like, you can see there's like symptoms or signs of the times that they were made. And, 1984, that was just what people were doing. Everything was like a synthesizer score, sometimes with better results than others. Like, better than this, I would say, synthesizer score, Rocky IV, great synthesizer score by Vince DiCola. The Transformers animated movie, great synthesizer score. On the other hand, bad synthesizer scores. This one, Sword of the Valiant, Overboard with Goldie Hawn, bad synthesizer score. And, I don't know. I know there's some others. None of them are coming to mind right now. But it looks like we got some people in the chat. Caleb is here. What's up, Caleb? And he's saying, fun fact, King Arthur was actually based on a Roman praetor. A praetor was basically the leader of a Roman legion who was stationed in southern England. And I didn't know that was true, but I know that was what they were doing with the King Arthur film, the Clive Owen version that I was talking about. That is pretty clear. It's like, it wasn't actually something that I was a huge fan of watching the movie. And, I had seen it before, and I don't even remember what my opinion was before. It was maybe just like, this was an average movie, this was an okay movie. Like I said, it didn't really make me a big fan of King Arthur. But it's definitely, it's got that sort of Roman, it's got those plot points of like, he's the Roman guard or captain of the guard, and, all the knights were, what is the nation? Sarmatian? But it's like these children that the Roman Empire has stolen from their villages and then raised to be soldiers and told, okay, if you fight for 15 years, then you can have your freedom. And that's all right, but it's actually, like that King Arthur movie, I think, speaking of signs of the times, it was a symptom of around the turn of the millennium, like taking myths and in Hollywood movies, making them quote unquote more realistic. So I think that's like the realistic version of King Arthur. But I think we lose something when we don't have like out and out magic for King Arthur. I think we lose something. So other versions that have the magic, like the animated version, the Sword of the Stone, definitely there's magic there. The Excalibur version again, definitely there's magic there. And I want to come back and talk about that in more detail. But realism in movies, not always a bad idea. I mean, there were, like, say, the 13th Warrior that came out around the same time with Antonio Banderas, which is like the realistic version of Beowulf and Grendel. And I'm not even sure, is Grendel in that one? But, it's like that legend. But it's like a realistic version of that with, like, some minor fantasy elements, like when he learns everyone's language. It's kind of like fantastic how he learns everyone's language by reading their lips. And then on the other, like after King Arthur came out, there was, that whole series of Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises. Like that's the realistic version or the more grounded version of Batman. So again, it's just, I would say, sign of the times. But, when it comes to the versions that have more magic, Excalibur is like really, I can't imagine what it was like. Because I just watched this for the first time yesterday. Again, I had a digital copy I bought on Vudu. And I had it for like a year. I bought it at the same time I bought Camelot, I think. And I watched Camelot and I kept going back to that. I loved it. And I just kept putting off. I didn't watch Excalibur. But what ended up happening was yesterday I chose to watch another Vudu copy I bought. I chose to watch First Night with Richard Gere and Sean Connery. And it was pretty good. It was pretty. It wasn't great, though. It was pretty good. I think it, like I said, did a really good job of humanizing, the love triangle, and like it makes sense. But spoiler alert for First Night, I would say it also deviates from the legend pretty heavily because at the end, like basically King Arthur sacrifices himself, and then I suppose they don't say it, but I think Lancelot's the new king, and then like he and Guinevere can live happily ever after, and like and it's like they really drive home the age difference between Sean Connery as King Arthur and like Julia Ormond as Guinevere, who I will say, best Guinevere. So, in my opinion, I mean, Keira Knightley, no one to sneeze at as an actress, as a screen presence. But her Guinevere, not my favorite. Vanessa Redgrave, also fantastic. Got some great songs in Camelot. Not my favorite. My favorite, Julia Ormond, the willful, defiant, stubborn Guinevere of First Night. And also, you could see why there would be a fight over her. That totally makes sense too. She's just fantastic in that film. She's the best part. Like Sean Connery and Richard Gere, I think it's hard to think of them as not Sean Connery and Richard Gere, so that kind of takes away from their performances. They're still great, but it's like the whole time you're watching, you're like, that's Sean Connery. That's Richard Gere. And with Julia Ormond, it's just like, that's Guinevere. So, really amazing performance by her in that film. And a reason that if I were to go rewatch it, I'd be rewatching it for her mostly. Although I'm more likely to just rewatch Camelot again. So Caleb's saying in the chat, your favorite King Arthur adaptation is definitely Aquaman. Okay, all right. Like, seriously, the film is a direct ripoff of the King Arthur legend and just reskinning it. Camelot equals Atlantis, Excalibur equals the Triad, etc. And that's extremely good point, absolutely correct. And if you had asked me a year ago before well, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, before I had seen Camelot, and definitely before I had seen Excalibur, I would agree with you without hesitation. I loved Aquaman when it came out, which was really surprising to me because I'm not a huge fan of the character of Aquaman in the comics. And also, I would make fun of, up to when Aquaman came out, I would make fun of Jason Momoa as Aquaman for, like just that line in Justice League where he's like, my man. Like me and my friends were walking around saying, my man, for like a year after that, just making fun of him, the bro Aquaman. But even though that's not bad per se, I'll still say like Momoa totally redeems himself as that character in Aquaman proper. And if we're gonna include if we're gonna say that like Amber Heard, the actress, as Mera in Aquaman is like the Guinevere stand-in, if we say that, then she might be up in the running for my favorite Guinevere too. She was fantastic in that film. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a fair argument there. And also, I'm glad you brought up the point about like the trident being Excalibur. That is definitely the case in the Aquaman movie. And Excalibur the sword itself doesn't get a lot of play in a lot of these adaptations, except for the big exception of that being the one with the name Excalibur, again by John Borman, which I'll just say right now, Excalibur, I mean, it's those three. I was going to say it's those three: First Night, Camelot, and Excalibur. But if we're bringing Aquaman into the mix, it might be Camelot and Aquaman and Excalibur. But I think if you just like pure fantasy, like high fantasy, if you just like classic high fantasy, then Excalibur basically broke the mold or set the mold or became the type of fantasy that like pretty much definitely every fantasy movie throughout the 80s after that owes a lot of its DNA in some way, shape, or form to John Borman's Excalibur. And even like continuing past the 80s into the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of the fantasy like Lord of the Rings that came out, that trilogy, I think owes a debt of gratitude to the presentational style, the aesthetic of Excalibur. And I envy, I think I may have mentioned this before, but I envy those who got to see Excalibur in the theater in 1981. That must have been an incredible trip. I mean, I don't think it was a huge monster hit, but it made its money back. It only cost $11 million to make. And it made like $33 million, I think, but it looks just incredible for the amount of money they spend. I mean, I know it's like $1980, but all the money was well spent. It is just an incredible, it's incredible. Like the production design, it's not even that it looks necessarily expensive, but it's just also, there's so much class and craft and just the production design, the score, the acting, everything in Excalibur is on another level. And it really, I think, does a fantastic job of transporting you to this other realm. And like that's especially important, I think, for retelling a myth like King Arthur. It like really leans into, with a film, like the dreamlike state you can kind of put an audience in with a classic on-print 35 millimeter film that is projected in a large dark theater. And part of the way they do that is just like this sort of eerie score that has opera cues, like O Fortuna is in there. You've heard that one before, the basically the screaming choir as horses ride into battle. That's in there, and just the way that they dub all the actors' lines. So it's not like everyone's out of sync, but it's like this sort of surreal quality as everyone is speaking. It is amazing. And it's like if you ever went to movies as a kid, I'm sure you had the same sort of experience as me where you're in the theater and as a kid, you leave the theater and like with the lights still, if it's still daytime, you went to a matinee, it's like everything's just so overwhelming to go back to the real world. I don't get that as much now as an adult, but I imagine like I wasn't even born yet. But if I had seen Excalibur like as a child in the theater, it would have just been so disorienting and like an incredibly, just like such a moving way. And I think that's really great for like I said, telling the story of King Arthur, because it's got this sort of dreamlike quality. And, that's a huge part of the symbolism for this myth is the dream, the myth itself of the land of Camelot. And they're a little more on the nose about that in Excalibur, but I think they get fantastic results with their approach. So looks like Caleb's got a couple more comments. He's saying, did you see the Kid Who Would Be King from last year with Patrick Stewart as Merlin? No, I didn't. I guess it's got to be on the list. I'm going through them all now. I might check it out this week. If you saw it, let me know if it's good, if it like stacks up to, the best with King Arthur. I didn't see it. It didn't really, the trailer didn't catch my interest when it was coming out, so I didn't go see it in the theater. But if it's good, I might check it out. I'm not sure if it's on any of the streaming services right now. But even if it's not, I can get it from Vudu. But the funny thing about that is, you may know this already, but it wasn't Patrick Stewart's first appearance in the King Arthur mythos, so to speak, because he is also in Excalibur. He plays Guinevere's dad. I think Leondegrance is his name in the film. And he's, Excalibur pretty much tells the whole tale. And they're drawing from, I think, the 15th or 16th century French novel, Le Mort d'Arthur, The Death of Arthur. And so it's like just this retelling of pretty much the whole life of Arthur and, the rise and fall of Camelot. And so like Leondegrance is one of the knights early on in the film who's trying to pull the sword from the stone. The other amazing thing about Excalibur is that we see Uther, the father, put the sword in the stone, and we see Arthur, the son, remove the sword from the stone. And honestly, again, in terms of the symbolism, the sword, the cup, the grail, the sexuality and the connection to the symbolism is on full display in Excalibur. Again, it's a little on the nose, but it's pure R-rated goodness, which means that, probably a lot of kids at the time did not see it. Because I also think this was interesting because it was probably before the time where they had PG-13. But even if they did have that rating, I am almost definitely sure that Excalibur still would have been released at the time as an R-rated film, with good reason and with excellent results. But like I said, Patrick Stewart plays Guinevere's father in that, and it's again like I'll make a comparison to how the characters are treated. In First Night, again, Sean Connery has all this dialogue about how he was friends with Guinevere's father, who is the ruler of Lyonesse, so I'm assuming still Leondegrance in that version of the story. But it's like they treat it in the dialogue as like they're equals. They would have been the same age. So it's it's Sean Connery's old, Guinevere's dad is old. He was a friend of the dad, and he got married to Guinevere, and it's maybe slightly inappropriate, and she's better off marrying the more age-appropriate romantic interest of Lancelot. Whereas in Excalibur, hewing closer to not the original version of the story, but one of the older versions of the story, that French novel, The Death of Arthur, Arthur knew Leondegrance when he was king, but that was because he was a boy who was king. He was the kid who would be king. And that's obvious, I think, even to people who have only seen, say, The Sword in the Stone, where the end of that movie is he pulls the sword from the stone. They give it away on the poster. He pulls the sword from the stone, and he becomes king. And then Merlin's like, well, you got a lot to learn about being king, which I guess leads to another question of who's the best version of Merlin and all these different King Arthur stories. And, I would say, I think the actor's name is Nicole Williamson in Excalibur. He's really something. It's like he's a bit of a ham in the movie, but it's just so appropriate. You can't really fault him. And, Merlin is supposed to be this sort of, you don't know what he is. He's like a magician. Is he man? Is he like some sort of force of nature, like the Green Knight? Or is he, something inhuman? That's not really entirely clear in Excalibur. And it's for the better. Like the performance is at times silly, at times frightening. He'll make you laugh, he'll make you cry, but it's amazing he's got that kind of range. Whereas, say, if you compare that to, I forget his name, I think it's Kent Swinson, something like that, Kurt Swinson, who was the voice of Merlin in the Disney movie. He's mostly the absent-minded professor in that, and it's like it's a fine portrayal of the character, but it's not, it's kind of one note, and it's certainly entertaining. So, and I like him, and I love that design. It's a classic Disney design. Whoever came up with it, whether it was who worked on that film, I think Bill Peet and Don Bluth, who both went on to greater fame later. So whoever designed the character did a good job, but I might say the King Arthur version, the 2004 version, is certainly not the best Merlin, because that's just like, he's just kind of a wild man. It's again like that grounded realism thing, where I think it loses something by not being, a magical version of the realm. So I'm going to give it to Nicole Williamson in Excalibur. Although it's been decades since I saw the TV miniseries Merlin, which I think had, who is it? Sam, darn it, I forget his last name, but the guy who was in Jurassic Park, Sam O'Neill, or Sam Neill, whichever it is. His Merlin might have been good, but I forget, it's been like that long since I've seen it. And what else? What else is good about this? Oh, I've drawn a bit on this. You know what? I'm going to switch over to, I also drew a headshot of Lancelot. And this is, I was going for more the Franco Nero version from Camelot, who, a little bit of movie trivia if you didn't know this. He and Guinevere from that movie, Vanessa Redgrave, the actor and actress who played Lancelot and Guinevere, ultimately did get married. It was years after that film. I'm not sure if they were just like together and then decided to get married like much, much later, because it was like they made the movie in the 60s and got married in the 2000s. But that's kind of, that's kind of a happy version of the tale as well, especially in real life. But, I could also say, doesn't quite look like Franco Nero. You might also say it's got some passing resemblance to, I want to say the Richard Gere version, as well as the guy, I forget the actor's name, in Excalibur. But they all sort of have like this similar sort of handsomeness to them. It's just with Richard Gere, it's like, it's Richard Gere, and he plays the character like so aloof that you have, it's like he's playing him like Richard Gere, like just this sort of charming, aloof guy who you half expect to like offer Guinevere the Holy Grail in a box and just like clasp it shut on her like a Pretty Woman moment or something. But anyway, Caleb's saying in the chat, like if Arthur, he's saying, Caleb says The Kid Who Would Be King is definitely a kid's movie. Not the best adaptation, but it's fun. It really pulls deep from the mythos. And if Arthur loses Excalibur, all he has to do is hold his hand over a body of water and it returns to his hand. All right, I didn't know that's interesting, because I didn't know that was all he had to do. It's a nice superpower to have. Like, I'm honestly, again, comparing it to like modern myths like Batman or Superman or most comic book superheroes, it's shocking to me that we haven't seen more comic book versions or like anime or cartoon versions, honestly, of King Arthur, more like the modern take. Because it's like Marvel did a short, they've got the X-Men Excalibur series, of course, but then they did like a short 3-issue miniseries with covers by Michael Golden in the early 90s that was based on a cartoon called King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. But again, that was another one that I saw as a kid. I saw the cartoon. I was like, yeah, I get it. King Arthur's popular, but I'm not sure why. And I think that's really, if you want to say there is any problem with the character, is that or the whole mythos is there's so many average or just okay versions of the story that it's not really going to win converts over to, seeking out more and being like, complete Arthur fanboys. And I would say I'm more in that camp now after seeing especially Camelot, but then also especially Excalibur, and then also to a degree Aquaman and First Knight. But then most of the others, I'm just like, well, it's all right, but there's a lot of things missing. But, in Excalibur, it's really good. If you haven't seen Excalibur, again, I can't recommend it enough. But there's a scene in there, actually, the first time he meets Lancelot, and they have a fight, which is, a part of the story that's told in different ways, in different versions. And, in Excalibur, Arthur is he's just a very proud king and leader of the knights at the time that he meets Lancelot. So he challenges him, and Lancelot keeps trying to give him an easy out, but Arthur is just getting angrier and angrier. It's like they fight, and like Arthur insists that it's going to be a fight to the death. And ultimately, it seems like he kills Lancelot, but in doing so, he breaks Excalibur, because essentially I think the subtext there, well, there's the sexual symbolism that might be obvious, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that one, of him breaking his sword on the man who will eventually sleep with his wife. But besides that, it might just be, on the face of it, that Lancelot's just such a holy character that the sword of power even is damaged through trying to harm him with it. But, in that same scene, it's like Arthur pleads to Merlin, you got to bring the sword back, please. And that's kind of the, it's an honest aspect about that presentation of Arthur and Excalibur, but it's not a very appealing aspect of Arthur in Excalibur, is that he's kind of a wimp, and both him and his dad, Uther, spend a lot of screen time basically begging Merlin to fix things for them. And one of the ways that happens in that scene is like, bring back the sword of power, bring back Excalibur. And Merlin's like, look. And it's like, yeah, he's over a body of water, and the Lady of the Lake raises the sword out, and it is either reforged or it was never broken in the first place. It was an optical illusion. It's hard to tell because, again, with Excalibur, it's like, with that movie, it's like there's such a dreamlike quality to so many of the scenes that you're not sure, like, was this real? Is this future or is this past? Like that sort of thing. But never for the worst. It's always a good quality. So that's an interesting piece of trivia, Caleb, that you bring up, that is something that always happens for Arthur, that he can just put his hand over a body of water and the sword will come back to him. And Caleb's also saying now in the chat, same with Robin Hood. There's been a recent movement to franchise public domain characters. Sherlock Holmes, King Arthur, Robin Hood, and that doesn't really work. I think it depends on the adaptation. Like, I would never say that it's going to be impossible for there to be another good version of Sherlock Holmes. But I think that there is a tendency, like you say, with public domain characters, for the really great stuff to be, well, it's like a diamond in the rough situation. But I think we could say the same thing for even characters that are owned by one organization, like, say, Batman or Superman. There's plenty of, I talked in a previous video about the good versions of Batman and the not so good versions of Batman on film. And like, everyone's going to have different likes and dislikes, but I think we all recognize that there are versions of Batman or Superman films that are not as good as others. So it's like, it's going to be the same whether it's public domain or not, I would say. But in terms of like the public domain characters, there's maybe some who work a little bit better more often. Like, I think Dracula, even if you do like a bad Dracula, it's like the love for just the myth of vampires is so popular that there's going to be, some demand for it, no matter how mediocre it is. Even though, again, there's great ones, and there's not so great ones. And Caleb's saying the most recent Robin Hood with Taron Egerton tried to do an origin story for Robin, and people didn't go see it because they know the legend, and that tanked their plans for a trilogy. Which, yeah, I'll say that I'm going to connect this back to King Arthur. It was the same thing with the Guy Ritchie film, right? Where you couldn't necessarily say that was a super realistic version. Like, I haven't seen it in a couple of years. I saw it when it came out, saw it in the theater. And I remember that was part of their plan there, right? Like, that was Warner Brothers, I believe. And they wanted to do a series, like either a trilogy or maybe even they said, the number I remember is 5. They wanted to do like 5 King Arthur movies, like a King Arthur extended cinematic universe. And I kind of think of just like, no matter what studio put them out, as just like all the stuff we've got as its own sort of ersatz King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table Camelot extended universe, the Camelot cinematic universe, the CCU. And I think it'd be really interesting if someone did like a fan edit that did like a complete life and times of King Arthur and tried to include at least a piece from all these different versions of it, even going back to like, I know there's like Lancelot and the Knights of the Round Table is, I think, a version from the 50s that I've never seen. But it'd be crazy, like, say they started with Excalibur, which I think starts earlier than all the others because it has Uther convincing Merlin to make him look like another guy so he can trick Igraine into sleeping with him, and then having the child Arthur, who Merlin takes away, and then is raised as Wart by Kay's father, as you remember in The Sword in the Stone. So we could go from like Excalibur, that opening prologue, to say The Sword in the Stone, all the squirrel stuff, all the getting turned into a fish stuff, and then we could go like segue from that to like Camelot the musical, where he's the beginning of that film is like he's moaning about like he's the king now and he needs help from Merlin, was always been a great teacher to him. And then we go from that into, say, honestly, I don't know how we connect King Arthur 2004, because again, that's like the Roman version. So I'm not sure how we are going to get like, I'm not sure we're going to get that one to jibe. But then we could also say we have like some segues to, say, Sword of the Valiant, which is again more of a side quest. And then near the end, after Arthur, we could have the whole Arthur is cheated on by Guinevere from First Night. We could have sequences from that movie. And then the quest for the Holy Grail, which again, I'm hoping that these like the sexual symbolism of what the Grail represents and what Excalibur represents is just blindingly obvious. I think it's up there, as clear as it could be. But then the quest for the Holy Grail, we could take those scenes even from just the absurdity of the quest for the Holy Grail is, I think, perfectly spoofed. And I haven't even mentioned it yet, but another one I saw as a kid, seen it a bunch of times, quoted it a bunch of times. Of course, I'm talking about Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which we probably say it's a loose connection, but it's got some of my favorite knights. We'll say that. It's got not just Sir Galahad and Sir Lancelot, but also Sir Robin. Well, Sir Lancelot the Brave and Sir Robin, the not quite as brave as Sir Lancelot. And of course, who could forget young William Palin playing the part of Sir, not appearing in this film. It's just a photo of a baby. I'm using that in the thumbnail for this live stream, by the way, because that's just fun. But let's see. Caleb is also saying here, we need new stories with these characters. They invented new villains, new mysteries, new adventures, etc. Take the YouTube Premium animated series version of Robin Hood that was based in the future with a girl named Robin stealing from super corporations and giving to the poor. I had no idea. I'm going to have to check that one out. I wasn't aware of that one. That's interesting. It does remind me of what I did see, was I saw a version of Robin Hood, also starring Keira Knightley. I think a Disney Channel movie that they put on DVD, and I saw it there, called Princess of Thieves, where she is, I believe, Robin Hood's daughter, also good with a bow and arrow. And she ends up, her love interest in that movie is Vampire Bill from True Blood, which, before he got that role. So that's really funny to me. But Princess of Thieves is what that reminds me of. It sounds a little similar to that. But Caleb, I ultimately agree with you. I think we should keep telling stories with these characters. And, they don't all have to be the way that Excalibur is, because Excalibur, as I see it, is like a faithful retelling of the story. But I think there's room for new versions. And, it's like I hinted at this before. I'm not sure why we haven't seen more like comic book versions, whether it's even comic book adaptations. Like, I was honestly surprised, because I know like when Dune came out in the 80s, or of course Marvel was doing Conan comics, but they did like a Dune adaptation. So it's like they had some experience like adapting fantasy to comic books, but I was shocked they didn't do an Excalibur adaptation. It seems like it would have been perfect. But you can't get everything. But I think there's a lot of room in comics for, say, a King Arthur comic. Now, whether that was like something that was more, say, anime inspired, or like, this again makes me think of that cartoon King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, where it's like they gave him like basically cool mech armor, and I think like a transformation sequence when like there's a point where like Excalibur really powers up all the characters, which is like, another it's like a sign of the times sort of thing with that series, with that cartoon. But yeah, there's a lot of room for new versions of King Arthur, and definitely a new comic version. So if it's going to have to be me, I haven't made a comic yet, but since King Arthur's in the public domain, if I ever wanted to self-publish a King Arthur comic, nothing would be standing in my way. I could basically do an adaptation of The Death of Arthur, same as John Borden did. I couldn't do the exact same version, same shots, same designs and everything, but I could do that story in comic form if I so chose. And honestly, I'm tempted because I was really, I was just into it by the end of this movie. So it's I'm probably more likely now to seek out even average versions of the story, thanks to having seen what I believe to be just some of the greatest versions, being Excalibur, the musical Camelot. I'll keep saying them. I'll keep repeating them. And also, like Caleb mentioned, even Aquaman. Aquaman is a great version of King Arthur. He's got the same name, as if it's not obvious enough. Arthur Curry. All right, so checking out on the chat again. Caleb saying, or no, actually we've got someone new in the chat. Welcome, Art for Your Eyes. You're saying awesome. Thanks for the compliment on the stream. Totally appreciate it. Always nice to hear. Glad you're enjoying the art. And if you've got a favorite King Arthur movie or book or story or video game, let me know. That was another thing. I don't know how many King Arthur video games there have been, but to a degree, isn't every Japanese role-playing game basically a version of the Knights of the Round Table? When you really get down to it, aren't most Final Fantasies and most Suikodens and anything else, they're basically, you're playing like a version of King Arthur, honestly, in video game form. And that was kind of a little bit what got me down this rabbit hole this week, because I was playing the new Final Fantasy VII demo, and I just got, into the whole hack and slash, I got a sword thing, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm in the mood for a King Arthur movie. I picked First Night, I watched that, I was like, I'm in the mood for another King Arthur movie. I watched Excalibur last night. It blew my mind, and I knew I had to talk about King Arthur today on the stream, so then I started seeking out other stuff. I rewatched a huge part of Camelot again. I watched, again, Sword of the Valiant, not that great. I rewatched King Arthur from 2004, or at least the first hour and a half of that. And I watched a couple minutes of the variation of that Mark Twain tale, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, by watching, what was it called? What was that? Unidentified Flying Oddball, which is literally about a man who invents a robot, and he and the robot blast off into space and get sent back into time to visit King Arthur's court. So I don't even know if it lives up to its promise, but it was so silly I couldn't even keep going. But essentially, I think I have just about said my piece on the Legend of King Arthur for this live stream. So I'm going to start winding down and giving you the YouTube spiel where I talk about, hey, you enjoyed this, right? Well, if you enjoyed the video, please do smash like. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. You can tap either the icon, it's over here, the icon in the corner of the video, or the subscribe button on the channel. Tap the bell for notifications so you always see when I'm going live, which generally speaking is Wednesday morning. I'm thinking I'm probably going to be here. There's a possibility that I will not be here this coming Wednesday, but I will catch up on X-Men comic reviews pretty soon after that if it's not Wednesday morning. And then, of course, Saturday nights, I made a pun this time. Did you get that in the thumbnail? Saturday Night Sketches, Knight. Get it? LOL. Very funny. Saturday Night Sketches. I'm actually surprised. Did I not do that? Because I did The Dark Knight Batman a couple weeks ago. Can't believe I didn't already make that joke with that one. Which, but it's just like you got to go for that low-hanging fruit sometimes. So anyway, anyone that ends up watching this video later, I'm very curious in the comments, what is everyone's favorite version, if you have one, of the Legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table? Again, I'm saying it's really a toss-up. It's neck and neck between Excalibur and Camelot for me. And there's a lot of other good ones too. But I really want to know what other people think, and tell me why. Tell me why. And also, what would be, if you want to offer this as a comment too, I'm curious, what would be your perfect mashup? What would you want in a new version of King Arthur? Do you need there to be more giant robots? Do you need it to be set in space? Do we need King Arthur in space? Do we need King Arthur in the present day? I guess that's more the kid who would be king. Whatever you think would be great for a new version of the myth, let me know. And I might do, depending on, demand. If there's any demand for it, I might go back and do a follow-up talking about what people say. But let me see. I'm going to put in some of this black here. So I'll put this in, and then I'll say, whoop. Can you tell? He's taking the sword from the lady in the lake. This is the visual. All right. That's as good a stopping point as any for this one. Again, thanks everyone for joining me. Really fun to do these live streams. Really fun to get this interaction. Thanks, Caleb. Thanks, Art for Your Eyes, for joining in the chat. Everyone else, leave a comment below. Smash that like. Subscribe to the channel. And if you're an artist yourself, make sure you keep drawing. And until next time, well, just have a good one, everybody. See you later.